Every day begins the same way for me, and I truly enjoy this peaceful routine. I usually wake up before the sun rises, when everything is still quiet and calm. In those early moments, I don't rush to do anything. I just sit quietly and listen to the world waking up. I hear birds singing softly in the trees, the gentle whisper of the wind moving through the leaves, and the faint sound of cars as the city slowly comes to life. These sounds remind me that a new day is beginning, and they help me prepare my mind before the day becomes busy. After spending a few quiet minutes alone, I make myself a cup of black coffee. I like it strong, with no sugar and no milk. I take the cup to my window and watch people outside as they start their day. Some people walk quickly, as if they are running late or worried about something. Others walk slowly, talking on the phone or listening to music. Watching them reminds me that every person has their own life, their own problems, and their own dreams. Everyone carries a story inside them, even if we don't see it. One morning, something unusual caught my attention. Across the street, at the bus stop, I noticed an elderly man who looked confused. He held a small bag and kept checking his watch again and again. When the bus arrived, he didn't get on. He just stood there, looking around as if searching for someone. I felt worried, so I walked over to him to see if he needed help. When I approached him, he smiled softly and told me he was waiting for a friend. They were supposed to go to the hospital together, but his friend had not arrived yet. I asked if he needed help, and he nodded. I called a taxi for him so he wouldn't miss his appointment. Before leaving, he shook my hand warmly and thanked me. His gratitude stayed with me for the rest of the day. It made me realize that kindness does not always have to be big. Even a small act can make someone feel seen, supported, and less alone. A few days later, life reminded me of this lesson again. I was at the supermarket, buying my usual groceries. When I reached the counter to pay, I discovered that my phone battery had died completely. Since I use a mobile app to pay, I couldn't complete the transaction. I felt embarrassed because people were waiting behind me, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, a young woman standing in line behind me smiled and said, "Don't worry, I can help you." Without hesitating, she paid for my groceries. I offered to return the money and asked for her contact, but she shook her head and simply said, "It's okay. Just help someone else when you can." Her words were simple but powerful. They made me realize that kindness moves in circles. What you give to someone may return to you in unexpected ways. Her words stayed with me, "Help someone else when you can." They reminded me that even small acts of kindness create invisible connections between people. Each time someone helps another person, that kindness continues to travel, touching more lives than we know. A few days later, something funny happened when I met a friend for lunch. We planned to meet at a small cafe near the park, a place we had visited before. When I arrived, the cafe was crowded and I couldn't find him. I sent him a message, but he didn't reply. I kept waiting, and after 15 minutes, I decided to order my food. Just as the food arrived, I heard familiar laughter behind me. I turned around and saw my friend smiling widely. He explained that he had been waiting at another cafe with the exact same name across the street. We both burst into laughter. That small misunderstanding turned into a moment we would never forget. It reminded me that life becomes more enjoyable when we learn to laugh at ourselves. Another memorable experience happened when I was running late for an important meeting. The traffic was terrible, and every red light felt like a personal challenge. I kept checking the time, knowing there was no chance of reaching the office on time. My stress was growing, and I imagined everyone being upset with me. But when I finally arrived 20 minutes late, my colleague simply smiled and said, "Relax, we just started." In that moment, all my stress disappeared. It taught me that sometimes the pressure we create in our own minds is far worse than reality. Staying calm and not letting worry control us can make life much easier. One weekend, I felt overwhelmed by constant messages, notifications, and screens, so I decided to disconnect for a while. I took a short trip to the countryside, hoping to find peace. I stayed in a small cottage owned by a local family. There was no Wi-Fi, no TV, and the nearest shop was several kilometers away. At first, the quiet felt strange and uncomfortable. I wasn't used to being away from technology. But slowly, I began enjoying the simplicity. I walked through wide green fields, listened to the sound of the river, and watched the sky turn beautiful colors during sunset. In the evenings, I had dinner with the family who owned the cottage, enjoying simple food and warm conversation. Those moments reminded me how important it is to pause, breathe, and reconnect with the world around us. They were warm and welcoming people who loved sharing stories about their land, their simple lifestyle, and the way they built the cottage with their own hands. Sitting with them, eating homemade food, and listening to their stories felt refreshing and comforting. That weekend taught me how important it is to slow down, step away from busy routines, and reconnect with the world in a calm and natural way. Life feels completely different when we allow ourselves to pause and simply exist in the present moment. When I returned home from the countryside, I realized how peaceful life can be when we slow down and pay attention to simple things. The quiet time I experienced there made me notice how differently I behaved in my normal environment. One of the first things I observed was how often I checked my phone. I looked at it while eating, walking, resting, or even when I wasn't expecting any message. It had become an automatic habit, something I did without thinking. To change this, I gave myself a small challenge: no screens in the morning. For the first 2 hours after waking up, I decided not to touch my phone, laptop, or any other device. Instead, I wanted to use that time to read a few pages of a book, write in my journal, stretch gently, or simply sit and breathe quietly. At first, it was surprisingly hard. My hands kept reaching for my phone out of habit. But after a few days, something wonderful happened. I felt lighter, calmer, and more focused. Without constant notifications and scrolling, my mornings became peaceful again. One rainy evening, I experienced something that reminded me how beauty can appear when we least expect it. I was waiting at a train station when suddenly the power went out. The lights flickered once, and then everything went completely dark. People around me became tense, whispering nervously and using their phone screens for light. The atmosphere felt strange and uncertain. Then, out of nowhere, a street musician sitting near the entrance began to play his guitar. The soft, warm sound spread through the station, gently calming everyone. People slowly stopped whispering and began listening. The fear in the air faded. When the lights finally came back on, the whole station applauded. People smiled at each other, and for a brief moment, strangers felt connected. That moment reminded me that even in darkness, a small act of creativity or kindness can bring comfort and bring people together. Another unforgettable experience happened on the day I lost my wallet on the bus. I didn't realize it was missing until I got home. A wave of panic washed over me as I thought about my ID, my cards, and everything inside. I quickly called the bus company, hoping someone had found it. The next morning, I received a call from a bus driver. A passenger had turned in my wallet. I rushed to the office, and when the driver handed it back, everything was untouched. I asked if he knew who returned it, but the person didn't leave their name. That moment reminded me that honesty still exists in the world, especially from people who expect nothing in return and whom we may never meet again. On weekends, I often visited a small library near my home. It was a peaceful place with tall windows that let in soft afternoon sunlight. The atmosphere felt calm, almost like entering a different world where time moves slower. It became one of my favorite places to relax, read, and let my thoughts settle. I enjoyed watching the sunlight move across the floor and hearing the gentle sound of pages turning. One quiet afternoon, I was sitting by the window reading when I noticed a small boy at a nearby table. He had a large book open, but he looked like he was struggling. His eyes moved slowly across the words, and he kept flipping back a page as if he didn't understand something. After watching him for a moment, I gently asked if he needed help. He looked up shyly and nodded. I moved to his table, and we began reading together, one sentence at a time. Every time he understood a new word, he smiled proudly, like he had just discovered a small treasure. After a while, his mother arrived. When she saw us reading together, she thanked me warmly and explained that her son had just started learning English and often felt nervous reading in front of others. That simple moment reminded me that learning anything new requires courage. Whether someone is young or old, every beginning needs a brave step. A few days later, I wanted to try something new, so I joined a beginner's Italian cooking class. The instructor was cheerful and full of energy. She kept saying, "Cooking is just like learning a language. You'll make mistakes, but that's exactly how you learn." She taught us how to make pasta from scratch. My first attempt looked strange and uneven. The dough stuck to my hands, and the shapes came out all wrong. Everyone laughed, including me, but it felt friendly and supportive, not embarrassing. By the end of the class, after trying several times, I finally made pasta that tasted surprisingly good. That class taught me that progress doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from patience, practice, and trying again even when you fail. A few months later, I joined a local hiking group. I wasn't sure if I would fit in because everyone seemed more experienced, but they welcomed me warmly. On one of our hikes, the weather changed suddenly. Heavy rain began pouring down, and the trail became muddy and slippery. Some people wanted to turn back, worried about falling. But one member encouraged us by saying, "Let's go slowly. It's just rain." His confidence helped all of us stay calm. We supported each other, offering a helping hand whenever someone slipped or struggled. Eventually, we reached the top of the hill. As we stood there, the rain stopped and the clouds began to open, revealing a breathtaking view. The sky looked wide and clean, and the world below seemed peaceful. That day taught me that encouragement and teamwork can turn a difficult situation into a beautiful memory. Another memory comes from a small restaurant where I once worked part-time during my college days. One afternoon, a customer walked in looking tired and sad. She ordered a cup of tea and sat quietly by the window, staring outside as if something heavy was weighing on her heart. I didn't want to disturb her, but I felt she needed a little kindness. So I brought her a small piece of cake and gently placed it on her table. "This is on the house," I said with a smile. She looked surprised at first, then her eyes softened. She thanked me and explained that she had been having a very difficult day. That tiny gesture, something so simple, seemed to lift her mood. Moments like this remind me that we never truly know what someone else is going through. A small act of kindness can make someone feel seen, supported, and less alone. Before she left, she told me she had actually lost her job earlier that morning. She said my gesture made her feel cared for during one of her hardest moments. Her words stayed with me for a long time, reminding me that kindness doesn't need to be big or dramatic. Even something ordinary can have a powerful effect on someone's heart. One cold winter morning, I was walking to work when I saw a young boy helping his mother carry several heavy grocery bags. The bags were too big for him, and he struggled to keep his balance, but he didn't complain or ask for help. He just kept trying. I walked over and offered to carry some of the bags with them. Together, we helped his mother bring everything to their apartment. She thanked me warmly and said, "You didn't have to." I smiled and replied, sometimes we do things simply because they're the right thing to do. That moment reminded me that good deeds don't need an audience or praise. They only need a sincere intention. Years ago, when I lived in another city, I had a neighbor named Daniel. He was an older man, retired, gentle, and full of energy. Every morning, he watered the plants outside our building and greeted everyone with a cheerful, "Good morning." One day I asked him how he always stayed so happy. He laughed softly and said, "Because I start my day with gratitude. It changes everything." His words made a strong impression on me. Since then, I have tried to begin each day by thinking of 3 things I'm grateful for. It may sound simple, but this small habit has made me more positive and more aware of the good around me. Gratitude truly shapes the way we see the world. One afternoon, after a long and tiring day at work, I went to a nearby park to relax. The sun was setting, and its golden light reflected beautifully on the surface of the lake. I found an empty bench and sat quietly, letting my mind rest. Nearby, a group of children fed ducks by the water. They laughed loudly, running back and forth, tossing pieces of bread into the lake. Their laughter was light and contagious. Not far from them, an elderly couple sat together, watching the children with gentle smiles. The whole scene felt peaceful, almost like a picture from a quiet storybook. As I watched, I realized how much beauty exists in ordinary, everyday moments. We rush through life so quickly, moving from one task to the next, that we often forget to pause and appreciate the small details that make life meaningful: laughter, sunsets, friendly smiles, and simple acts of care. These little things are easy to miss, but they carry a kind of quiet magic that can steady the heart and calm the mind. While I was still sitting on the bench, a man walked by with his dog. The dog was friendly and curious, wagging its tail and sniffing the grass with excitement. It stopped in front of me as if it wanted to say hello, and I reached out to pet it. The man laughed and apologized, explaining that his dog loved greeting everyone. I didn't mind at all. The dog's playful energy made the moment brighter. We talked for a while. He told me he walked his dog, Max, every evening because it helped him clear his mind after a long day. He also shared how Max had been a huge source of comfort during stressful and lonely times. Listening to him made me realize that companionship doesn't always come from people. Sometimes a loyal pet can bring comfort, joy, and emotional support in beautiful and unexpected ways. The next morning, I visited a coffee shop I often go to. The barista recognized me and greeted me warmly. "The usual?" she asked. I nodded and smiled. While waiting for my drink, I noticed a young woman sitting in the corner working on her laptop. She looked stressed, rubbing her eyes and letting out small sighs. A few minutes later, she accidentally knocked over her cup of coffee, spilling it across the table. One day, I saw a woman accidentally spill her coffee. She looked embarrassed and stressed, so I quickly gave her some tissues. She looked up with surprise and said, "Thank you. I think today is not my day." I smiled and replied softly, "It happens to everyone. Tomorrow will be better." We both laughed, and for a moment her frustration seemed to fade. That small, simple act of kindness reminded me how even tiny gestures can make someone feel lighter and less stressed. Later that week, I was invited to speak at a community center about communication skills. The group was small and filled with people who were learning English as a second language. Some looked nervous, while others seemed excited and curious. To make them feel comfortable, I shared a story from my own experience when I was learning a new language. I told them about a time I mixed up 2 similar-sounding words and ended up saying something funny instead of polite. Everyone laughed, including me. That laughter broke the nervousness in the room. After that, people started participating more, speaking with more confidence and energy. It reminded me that sharing our own mistakes can help others feel brave enough to try. Another day, I had to take a train to another city. The train was delayed, and people around me began complaining. I felt stress rising inside me too, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Instead of getting upset, I looked around and noticed small things: the reflection of lights on the wet ground, the sound of people talking, and the distant noise of other trains passing by. Paying attention to these simple details helped me relax. When the train finally arrived, the journey felt easier, not because the delay disappeared, but because my mindset changed. These everyday experiences taught me something important. Life gives us many small chances to show kindness, to connect with others, and to appreciate ordinary moments. A friendly smile to a stranger, a patient attitude during a delay, or a few gentle words can turn an ordinary day into a meaningful memory. Sometimes small choices like listening, being kind, or slowing down make life brighter for others and for ourselves. Another time, I had to wait for a train that was delayed because of heavy rain. Everyone around me looked annoyed and kept checking their phones. Instead of getting frustrated, I took out a book I had been wanting to read for a long time. After a few minutes, the man next to me noticed and asked what I was reading. That simple question started a long conversation. He told me he was a musician and was traveling for a concert. He even showed me short videos of his performances. By the time the train arrived, I felt grateful for the delay because it allowed me to meet an interesting and talented person. This experience reminded me that unexpected situations sometimes bring unexpected friendships or lessons. On a calm Sunday morning, I visited a local market. The place was full of colors, sounds, and delicious smells. Vendors were calling out prices, soft music played in the background, and people moved from stall to stall bargaining for fresh fruits and vegetables. I stopped at a fruit stand run by an elderly woman. She offered me a piece of mango and asked where I was from. We started talking, and she told me she had been selling fruits in the same market for more than 30 years. "This market is my home," she said with a warm smile. "The people here are my family." Hearing her words made me realize how much dedication and love some people put into their everyday work. Her passion and consistency reminded me that happiness can be found in simple, steady contributions. Another experience happened when I went to renew my passport at a government office. The line was long, and everyone looked frustrated and tired. The man standing behind me joked about how slow the process was, and soon the whole line started laughing. That small moment of humor made the long wait feel much easier. Soon everyone around him began smiling or quietly laughing. Even the staff at the office looked a little more relaxed. That small joke changed the whole atmosphere. It reminded me that sometimes a simple smile or a short funny comment can make a difficult situation feel lighter. Small acts like that help people feel connected, even if they are strangers sharing only one moment. During one of my evening walks, I saw a street artist painting a mural on a big wall near a busy intersection. A small crowd gathered around him, watching quietly. His hands moved confidently, turning a blank wall into bright colors and beautiful patterns. Some people took photos, while others just watched in silence. Even though cars and buses rushed past, the space around the artist felt calm. I realized that art has the power to bring people together. For a few minutes, strangers who had never met before stood side by side, sharing the same peaceful experience. It reminded me that little moments, like a joke, a conversation, or watching someone create art, can bring meaning to an ordinary day. Life moves fast, and we often rush from one thing to another without noticing the moments around us. But even simple situations, a delayed train, a long line, a busy market, or a street artist painting, can hold beauty and lessons if we slow down and pay attention. These moments can teach us patience, kindness, and appreciation. Another evening, I saw a street artist painting a large mural of people helping one another. Curious, I asked him what inspired his work. He smiled and said, "I paint what I wish people remembered: everyday kindness." His words stayed with me. Art can express things that words sometimes cannot. His mural became a gentle reminder for everyone passing by to notice small acts of goodness in their daily lives. A few weeks later, I met an old friend at a bookstore. We hadn't seen each other in years, and it felt good to catch up. We talked about our routines, our jobs, and how much the city had changed. Then he said something that really touched me. After so many years of chasing success, I realized happiness didn't come from achievements. It came from peaceful mornings. His words made me stop and think. Sometimes what we truly need is not more success or recognition, but more quiet, simple moments that bring peace into our lives. One cold evening, I visited a small bakery near my home. The warm smell of fresh bread greeted me as soon as I walked in. The baker, a friendly man in his 50s, smiled at everyone who entered. I asked him how he stayed motivated working such long hours. He told me he starts baking at 3 a.m. every day and finishes late in the afternoon. When I asked why he keeps doing it, he laughed and said, "Because people smile when they taste what I make." His answer stayed in my mind. It showed me that joy grows when our work brings happiness to others, even in small, simple ways. Another rainy night, I was walking home without an umbrella when heavy rain suddenly started. I ran under a shop awning to stay dry. A man was already standing there. Seeing how wet I was, he gently offered half of his umbrella and said, "You can share it until the rain stops." We stood together for around 10 minutes, talking about work, weather, and daily life. When the rain ended, he smiled, wished me a good evening, and walked away. We didn't exchange names, but that short moment of kindness felt warm and meaningful. It reminded me that kind gestures don't need to be big or long-lasting to make a difference. Another memory came from a quiet afternoon in the city. I saw an elderly man struggling to carry a heavy bag. I offered to help him, and we walked slowly to his apartment. He thanked me softly and said, "You didn't have to do that." I smiled and replied, "Sometimes we do things just because they're right." That moment reminded me that kindness doesn't need recognition or reward. It only needs intention, just the simple desire to help someone. These experiences, from murals and friendly strangers to bakers, old friends, and quiet acts of kindness, have taught me something important. Life is full of small moments that can inspire, comfort, or bring joy. When we slow down, notice the world around us, and share kindness, even ordinary days become meaningful memories. One special memory comes from the time I volunteered at an animal shelter. My job was to clean the kennels and feed the dogs. It felt tiring at first, and I wondered if I would enjoy it. But soon, I noticed that each dog had its own personality. Some were shy, some playful, and some simply wanted a little attention. There was one small brown dog named Leo who always sat quietly in the corner. One morning, I sat down near him without saying anything. After a few minutes, he slowly walked toward me and rested his head on my leg. That tiny moment of trust taught me a powerful lesson. Patience and kindness can build a connection without a single word. Another weekend, I visited a cooking festival downtown. Food stalls from many countries lined the streets. I tasted Indian curry, Italian pasta, Japanese sushi, and lots of other dishes I had never tried before. While enjoying my food, I met a couple from Thailand. They told me they were traveling across Asia to learn about different cuisines. They shared how food can connect people no matter where they come from or what language they speak. Their passion showed me once again that simple things like food, art, or kindness can bring people together in beautiful ways. That conversation reminded me that sharing a meal is one of the oldest and most natural ways for people to connect. A simple meal can create memories and bring people together in ways nothing else can. Food has a special power. It makes people comfortable, open, and willing to share stories, experiences, and emotions. Sometimes inspiration comes from unexpected places. One day, while waiting at a cafe, I overheard a group of students discussing their project. They were excited, full of ideas, and not afraid of trying new things. One of them said, "Even if it doesn't work, at least we tried something new." That sentence stayed with me. Many people fear failure, but these students saw mistakes as part of learning and growing. Their attitude reminded me that progress in life, whether in work, relationships, or personal dreams, often comes from the courage to try without worrying too much about perfection. Curiosity and bravery sometimes matter more than getting everything right. A few days later, I went to the library to return some books. At the counter, I noticed an older man struggling to find his library card. He looked embarrassed as he checked every pocket. The librarian gently reassured him, "It's okay. We'll find it together." Her calm voice instantly relaxed him. Within moments, she located the card, and he smiled in relief. Watching this small moment made me realize how powerful patience and kindness can be. Even small gestures, like speaking kindly, staying patient, or offering help, can change someone's entire day. These little acts might seem simple, but their impact can last much longer than we think. Experiences like helping a quiet dog gain trust, sharing meals with travelers, seeing brave students discuss ideas, and witnessing small acts of kindness remind me that life is full of tiny but meaningful moments. The world offers countless opportunities to connect, learn, and make someone's day better. Often, the most valuable lessons come not from big events, but from quiet, everyday situations when we notice, listen, and respond with care. That moment with the librarian showed me that empathy doesn't always mean solving problems completely. Sometimes it simply means making someone feel seen, heard, and understood. A kind word, a gentle tone, or a patient response can reduce stress and create a peaceful atmosphere even in ordinary routines. Another day, I visited a local art gallery. One painting immediately caught my attention, a small boat struggling in a stormy sea. I asked the artist what the painting meant. He explained, "The sea represents life's challenges, and the boat represents us. We cannot control the storm, but we can learn how to steer." His words stayed with me. The painting reminded me that resilience is not about avoiding difficulties. It's about learning how to move through them with strength and hope. One weekend, I tried pottery for the first time. The instructor said, "Pottery requires patience. If you rush, the clay will break." At first, I struggled. Every time I shaped the clay, it collapsed and I had to start again. But after several attempts, I finally made a small bowl. It wasn't perfect, but I felt proud. The experience taught me something important. Mistakes are not failures. They are steps toward improvement. Creativity and growth come from trying, failing, and trying again until something beautiful forms. Another day, while jogging in the park, I saw a man helping a stranger fix a bicycle chain. The bike owner looked relieved and said, "You saved my day." The helper simply replied, "No problem. We all need each other sometimes." That moment showed me how communities grow stronger when people help without expecting anything in return. Simple acts, sharing knowledge, offering assistance, being patient, create connections that ripple outward. One afternoon while buying groceries, I saw a mother teaching her young child to say "thank you" to the cashier. The boy seemed shy at first, but eventually whispered it with a tiny smile. The cashier smiled back warmly. It was such a small moment, yet it showed how kindness and manners begin early in life. Simple gestures of gratitude can build confidence and teach empathy. During another weekend, I joined a photography group exploring city life. We took pictures of people working, eating, talking, and moving through the streets. I captured a photograph of a street vendor helping an elderly man carry his groceries. That single moment reminded me how ordinary situations often contain extraordinary lessons about humanity. We might miss these scenes if we are too distracted or busy rushing through the day. These experiences, from librarians and artists to potters, strangers in the park, children learning politeness, and street vendors offering help, taught me that life becomes meaningful through attention, patience, and kindness. We don't always need grand actions to bring joy, inspiration, or connection. Often, the smallest actions create the biggest impact. Taking time to notice, to help, or simply to be present can transform ordinary moments into memories that stay with us for a long time. Every day gives us a new opportunity to learn, connect, and make life a little brighter for ourselves and the people around us. That photo of the street vendor and the elderly man became one of my favorites. Without a single word, it told a story of kindness, humanity, and quiet strength. When I showed it to my friends, one of them said, "It's amazing how you can feel kindness even from a simple photo." And I realized that sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that speak the loudest. I nodded in agreement because that moment reminded me that even very small actions can communicate powerful messages and touch people's hearts. A simple gesture, a kind smile, or a quiet act of help can stay in someone's memory for a long time. A few days later, I visited a park and sat near the fountain with my notebook. While I was writing, a little girl ran past me chasing a butterfly. She laughed every time she almost caught it, and then it flew away again. Her mother smiled and said gently, "It's okay. Just enjoy the chase." Those simple words stayed with me. They made me realize that in life, we often focus so much on reaching our goals that we forget to enjoy the moments along the way. Happiness is not only about achieving something. It is also about enjoying the journey, appreciating the small steps, and finding joy in the process. Another day, I took a short bus ride to the edge of the city. The scenery outside the window was beautiful: green fields, flowing rivers, and mountains far in the distance. Next to me sat an elderly woman quietly knitting. She looked peaceful, focused, and content. I asked her what she was making, and she replied softly, "A scarf for my grandson. He lives far away, but when he wears it, I want him to feel my warmth." Her answer touched my heart. It reminded me that love doesn't always need big words or grand actions. Sometimes love is expressed through small, thoughtful things: a handmade gift, a gentle gesture, or a warm message. Love can travel across any distance when it comes from the heart. A few days later, I attended a storytelling evening at a local cafe. People took turns sharing their personal experiences about love, fear, hope, and the lessons life had taught them. One speaker talked about losing everything in a fire. At first, his voice trembled, but then he said, "When everything is gone, you discover what truly matters." The entire room fell silent. His words reminded me how loss, although painful, can help us understand life more deeply. Sometimes losing things shows us what is truly important: family, health, kindness, time, and the strength inside us. A few months earlier, I had joined a community gardening project in my neighborhood. I didn't know much about planting, but I wanted to learn something new and meet new people. Volunteers of all ages worked together: children, parents, students, and older residents. Everyone had a small part of the garden to care for. My task was to plant tomato seeds. At first, I was confused about how deep to place them or how often to water them. But with the help of volunteers, and by trying again and again, I began to see tiny green shoots appear in the soil. Those little plants gave me a sense of joy and accomplishment. More than the gardening itself, The people around me made the experience special. We shared advice, laughed at our small mistakes, and celebrated every bit of progress. I realized that growth, whether in plants or in people, requires patience, care, and a supportive community. One morning, while I was watering the tomatoes, a little boy came up and asked if he could help. "I like watching things grow," he said. Together, we planted more seeds and talked about how patience is like sunlight. It helps things grow slowly but surely. Weeks later, the first tomatoes appeared, and the boy proudly showed them to everyone. Seeing his excitement taught me that sharing knowledge and encouraging others can bring joy not only to them but also to ourselves. One afternoon, I visited a local barbershop for a haircut. There were a few people waiting, so I sat down with a magazine. The barber, an older man, spoke kindly to every customer. He asked about their families, their work, and even told light-hearted stories that made everyone smile. When it was my turn, I asked him if he ever got tired of talking so much every day. He smiled and said, "No, not at all. People come here not just for a haircut, they come for conversation." His words reminded me that small local businesses are more than places for services. They are places where people feel connected, welcomed, and valued. Another weekend, I walked through the old part of the city. The narrow streets were full of history. I entered a small antique shop run by an elderly man. He showed me old clocks, faded photographs, and books from another era. He pointed to a picture of the city from 50 years ago and said, "Look how much has changed." We talked for almost an hour about how time changes buildings, streets, and habits, but human feelings, love, fear, hope, and compassion remain the same through generations. That conversation reminded me that even though the world moves fast, history lives through stories, memories, and the objects people cherish. Another day, I saw a group of people practicing yoga in the park. The instructor explained how proper breathing can calm the mind and reduce stress. I joined them out of curiosity. In the beginning, focusing on my breath and holding the postures was difficult, but after a while, I felt more peaceful and centered. That small experience taught me that taking time to slow down, breathe, and be present can bring balance to life. Even a few quiet moments each day can make the mind clearer and the heart lighter. When the yoga session ended, the instructor said something I will never forget. The body needs exercise, but the mind needs silence. Those words stayed with me. They reminded me that caring for ourselves physically, emotionally, and mentally is essential for a meaningful life. All these experiences, from a girl chasing a butterfly, an elderly woman knitting with love, storytellers sharing wisdom, gardening with children, chatting with barbers and shopkeepers, and finding peace in yoga, taught me that life's greatest lessons often appear in small, simple moments. When we slow down, pay attention, and stay open-hearted, we discover that kindness, patience, connection, and love are everywhere around us. Life becomes richer when we notice these quiet moments, when we share a smile, offer help, or simply listen. Every ordinary day holds a chance to learn, grow, and make the world a little brighter for ourselves and for others. Those words stayed with me for days. Since then, I've tried to spend a few quiet minutes every morning just breathing deeply and staying still before the day begins. It's a small habit, but it makes a big difference. It helps me feel calmer, more focused, and more prepared, as if I'm starting the morning with peace instead of stress. A few weeks later, I attended a dinner party with people from many different countries. Everyone brought a dish from their own culture. Someone made spicy Indian curry. Another person brought warm Italian pasta. Someone else arrived with fresh Japanese sushi. As we passed the dishes around, we also shared stories about our lives. A woman from Brazil smiled and said, "Food connects hearts before words do." Everyone nodded because we all felt that truth. Food became a bridge between different backgrounds, and that evening reminded me that diversity becomes beautiful when people share it with kindness, curiosity, and respect. One cold winter morning, I saw my neighbor struggling to start his car. He tried several times, but the engine refused to start. I walked over to help, and together we checked everything we could, but nothing worked. Finally, he laughed and said, "Maybe it just needs a day off." His positive attitude in that frustrating moment made me smile. Later that week, he surprised me with a small box of cookies to say thank you. He told me, "Sometimes help comes from where you least expect it." That simple exchange showed me how small acts of support can build real friendships, even between people who barely knew each other before. A few months ago, I attended a language learning event at a cultural center. The rule was simple. Everyone had to speak only in English, no matter how many mistakes they made. One participant from Spain said nervously, "My English is not perfect." The teacher smiled and replied, "Perfection is not the goal. Communication is." After that, everyone relaxed. We played games, shared stories, and laughed at our funny mistakes. By the end of the event, people were speaking more confidently, not because they became perfect speakers, but because they felt safe to try. It reminded me that confidence grows in places where people feel supported instead of judged. One afternoon, I stopped at a small cafe for tea. While waiting, I noticed an elderly woman struggling to carry 2 heavy bags of groceries. I went over to help. She smiled with relief and said, "Thank you, dear. My arms aren't as strong as they used to be." I walked with her to the bus stop and listened as she talked about her grandchildren and the meals she loved cooking for them. It was a small moment, but I felt grateful to share a few minutes of kindness with someone who needed it. All these experiences, morning silence, shared meals, helping neighbors, learning languages, and offering small acts of kindness, remind me that everyday life is full of meaningful moments. We don't need big achievements to feel connected or fulfilled. Often, it's the small human interactions that make our days brighter and our hearts warmer. One day in a quiet park, I saw an old man feeding a group of stray cats. He carried a small bag of food, and to my surprise, he called each cat by name. Curious, I asked how long he had been doing this. He smiled softly and said, "Every evening for the last 6 years. They wait for me now." His dedication touched me deeply. It reminded me that true kindness doesn't need attention or applause. Sometimes it's simply a quiet routine done out of love, even when no one is watching. One morning, I overslept and nearly missed an important meeting. I rushed out without breakfast, feeling tense and stressed. When I arrived at the office, a coworker noticed my tired expression. Without asking anything, she handed me a warm cup of coffee and said gently, "Breathe. You made it. That's what matters." That small, thoughtful gesture instantly changed my mood. It reminded me how empathy in the workplace can turn a stressful day into a manageable one. Sometimes a kind word can help more than any long explanation. A few days later, I visited a small music shop to buy new guitar strings. When I walked in, the owner was playing an old blues tune. I listened quietly, and he smiled when he saw me. "Music is the best therapy," he said. I agreed. He told me he had been playing since childhood and that music had helped him through difficult times. "When you play," he said, "the world disappears." I understood exactly what he meant. Everyone needs something that brings peace, whether it's music, writing, walking, or simply sitting in silence. Another day at a train station, I saw a man struggling to carry a heavy suitcase up a steep set of stairs. Without hesitating, I offered to help. Together, we lifted the suitcase to the top. He thanked me warmly and said he was traveling to see his daughter for the first time in years. I could see the excitement and hope in his eyes. As he left, he smiled and said, Kindness always finds a way. His words stayed with me for a long time. That short meeting with a stranger reminded me that our lives are filled with small but meaningful moments. Sometimes these moments come from people we may never meet again, yet they stay in our hearts. A week later, another simple but touching experience happened. I was walking along a busy street when I noticed a woman trying to open her car door while holding several grocery bags. She looked worried, as if everything might fall at any moment. I quickly stepped forward to help her. She gave me a warm smile and said, "Thank you." I was afraid everything would fall. We talked for a short moment, and she told me how a tiny bit of help can feel like a huge relief after a long, tiring day. Her words reminded me that kindness does not require special skills. You only need awareness and a willingness to help. All these experiences, watching an old man take care of stray cats, receiving comfort during a stressful morning, listening to a musician's wisdom, helping a traveler, and assisting a stranger, taught me something important. Life is not meaningful only because of big achievements. Instead, it becomes rich through small moments of kindness, empathy, and connection. When we pay attention to people around us, we discover countless chances to make someone's day brighter. And surprisingly, these moments also make our own lives brighter. A week later, I joined a small group for a mountain hike. The air was cool and fresh, the sky was clear, and birds were singing softly in the forest. As we walked deeper into the mountains, the trail became steeper and a little slippery. At one point, a woman in the group slipped and lost her balance. Without even thinking, the others rushed to help her stand up. She laughed and said, "I guess the mountain wanted to test me today." Her lighthearted attitude made everyone smile, and we continued our walk together. That moment showed me how shared challenges bring people closer. When a group faces difficulties together, trust grows naturally and the journey becomes more meaningful. Another morning, I took a train to a small coastal town. After arriving, I walked along the beach and watched fishermen preparing their nets for the next day. One fisherman invited me to sit with him and offered me tea. As we talked, he told me about his daily life, waking up before sunrise, reading the movement of the waves, and learning patience from the sea. He said, "The ocean gives, but only to those who respect it." His words made me think about balance, especially in our relationship with nature. We take so much from the world, but we must also protect and care for it. One late afternoon, I visited a small bookstore to look for new novels. The owner, a gentle man who had kind eyes, told me he had been running the shop for 40 years. While talking, he said, "Books are like friends. Some stay with you forever. Others pass through your life, but leave lessons behind." I loved that idea. Reading has always helped me learn, dream, and escape reality for a moment. His words reminded me how deeply stories can shape our thoughts, emotions, and even our character. One evening, while walking home, I witnessed a beautiful act of kindness. A taxi driver stopped his car to help an elderly man cross the road safely. The old man walked slowly, step by step, and the driver patiently guided him without rushing. There were no cameras, no applause, no attention, just pure humanity. Watching this made me realize that kindness often happens quietly. Even though we may not notice it every day, many people are making the world softer and warmer through simple, thoughtful actions. A few days later, I joined another cooking class, this time to learn how to bake bread. The warm smell of dough filled the kitchen as the instructor explained each step patiently. She said, "Bread teaches patience. If you rush, it doesn't rise. If you wait, it becomes something beautiful." As I kneaded the dough, I realized how true her words were, not just for baking, but for life. Many things in life take time: growth, healing, learning, and understanding. When we give things the time they need, the results are almost always worth it. In one class, we all mixed the ingredients, kneaded the dough, and waited for it to rise. When the bread finally came out of the oven, the warm smell filled the room. Everyone looked proud of their loaves. The instructor smiled and said, "See? When you give time and effort, something beautiful always happens." That class taught me more than how to bake bread. It taught me to appreciate slow progress and to enjoy the process, not just the result. Another memorable moment happened when I went to a hospital to visit a friend. While sitting in the lobby, I saw a nurse comforting a small boy who was terrified of getting an injection. She knelt beside him, held his hand gently, and began telling him a funny story. Slowly, the boy relaxed and even laughed. Watching them, I realized that compassion can heal in ways medicine sometimes cannot. A gentle voice or a kind gesture can give someone the courage they need to face something scary. A few weeks later, I attended a seminar on mindfulness. The speaker said, "We often live in the future or the past, but rarely in the present." His words were simple but powerful. I realized how often my mind wandered to worries, plans, and old memories instead of appreciating the moment I was actually living. After the seminar, I began practicing mindfulness by paying attention to small, everyday things like the feeling of warm sunlight, the taste of fresh tea, or the sound of rain. Slowly, I learned that the present moment holds many small gifts, but we only notice them when we slow down. The sound of footsteps on the pavement, the smell of fresh coffee, the softness of morning sunlight, the changing colors of the sky, these little observations made my days feel richer and more peaceful. One evening, I walked through a crowded train station and heard the sound of a violin. The music was so beautiful that people stopped rushing and simply listened. The musician played with his eyes closed, completely lost in the melody. For a few minutes, the noisy station felt quiet and connected, as if time had slowed down. When he finished, everyone clapped and dropped coins into his case. He smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for listening." That moment made me realize how art can bring strangers together through shared emotion. Another day, I took my niece to the zoo. She was overflowing with excitement, eager to see every animal she had learned about in school. Her eyes lit up as she pointed at birds, monkeys, and colorful fish. Her joy reminded me how seeing the world through a child's eyes can make ordinary things feel magical. Children naturally find happiness in small experiences, and being with her reminded me to notice wonder again. Later, I visited a flea market on a sunny Saturday. The market was full of handmade crafts, old books, colorful fabrics, and antiques with stories from the past. I stopped at a stall run by a woman selling delicate clay figurines. Each piece was detailed and clearly made with care. When I asked how long she had been creating them, she said she started during a difficult time in her life and that making art helped her heal. Her honesty touched me deeply. I realized that art is not just something to look at, it can be a way to express feelings that are hard to put into words. A few nights later, I was walking home when I noticed a man standing under a street light, calmly reading a small book. Cars passed by and the city was noisy, but he looked peaceful. Curious, I asked what he was reading. He smiled gently and said, "Poetry. It reminds me to slow down." I understood immediately. In a world that rushes forward without pause, poetry allows us to breathe, reflect, and reconnect with ourselves. Even a brief pause can be meaningful. Months before, I had joined a volunteer program at a local animal shelter. Every weekend, I cleaned cages, fed the dogs, and took them for walks. One small brown dog named Milo was shy and afraid of people, always sitting quietly in the corner. For days, he wouldn't come near me. I continued showing up, speaking softly, and giving him space. Slowly, he began trusting me. One day, He wagged his tail for the first time and walked right up to me. That tiny moment felt like a huge victory. Over the next few weeks, he grew more confident and playful. When a kind family finally adopted him, I felt proud and emotional. Milo taught me that patience and kindness can transform a life, even the life of a frightened little dog. Another memory came from a rainy morning at the train station. I stood under a small shelter, trying to stay dry while rain poured down. A woman nearby dropped her bag, spilling papers, snacks, and a notebook onto the wet floor. Without thinking, I helped her gather her things. She smiled and said, "Rainy days always test me." We both laughed, and that simple moment turned a gloomy morning into something warmer. Helping someone takes very little effort, yet it can completely change the mood of a day. All these experiences, my niece's curiosity, the artist at the market, the man reading poetry, Milo learning to trust, and the woman at the train station, remind me that life teaches us through everyday moments. If we pay attention, we can learn something new, feel something meaningful, and become a little kinder each day. Their stories hold lessons that books sometimes cannot teach. A week later, I went to a small lakeside park to relax. As I sat on a bench, I noticed a teenager practicing guitar under a tree. He repeated the same melody again and again, sometimes getting it right, sometimes stopping in frustration. After a while, he saw me watching and laughed nervously. "I'm still learning," he said. I told him, "Everyone starts somewhere." He smiled and replied, "Yeah, but I want to be good." His determination reminded me that improvement always begins with small, imperfect attempts. Even the best musicians were beginners once. Another day, while riding a crowded subway, I saw a mother struggling to calm her crying baby. People around her looked annoyed. I offered my seat and made a small funny face at the baby. To my surprise, the child stopped crying and stared at me with wide eyes. The mother sighed in relief and said, "Thank you." Sometimes he gets overwhelmed. That moment reminded me how a little patience can make public spaces more humane. Everyone faces struggles we might not see. A few evenings later, I joined a neighborhood cleanup event. Volunteers of all ages gathered with gloves and trash bags to pick up litter around the park. One little girl picked up a candy wrapper and proudly said, "One piece at a time." Her simple words stayed with me. Big changes often start with tiny steps, repeated by many. One morning while waiting in line at a bakery, I noticed the person in front of me counting coins nervously. He realized he didn't have enough money for what he wanted and stepped aside. Without thinking, I offered to cover the difference. He looked surprised and asked, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Because today I can." His grateful smile made my morning brighter. Generosity is often less about the amount we give and more about the moment we choose to give it. A few days later, I visited a bookstore again. Near the entrance, a small group was gathered around an author giving a talk. She said, "Stories remind us that we're never alone in our experiences." I thought about all the people I had met in these small, unexpected moments, strangers who taught me lessons without even knowing it. Life is full of stories, and each one holds a piece of wisdom. Another time, I walked along a riverside path and saw a young man painting the water's reflection. The river shimmered under the late afternoon sun, and he captured every color with care. When I asked what he liked most about painting outdoor scenes, he said, "Nature teaches me patience. You can't rush a sunset." His words felt like a gentle reminder to slow down and appreciate things that cannot be hurried. One rainy evening, I stepped into a small convenience store to escape the weather. The cashier was humming happily as he scanned items. When it was my turn, I asked why he seemed so cheerful. He laughed and said, "Rain makes people grumpy, so I try to be extra kind on days like this." His attitude turned a gloomy evening into something warmer. All these moments, big and small, reminded me again that life's most meaningful lessons come from ordinary interactions, a shared smile, a simple favor, a brief conversation. These small exchanges create a quieter, kinder world, and they stay with us long after the moment has passed. Life teaches us in everyday moments, sometimes from people and places we least expect. One weekend, I joined a cooking class focused on traditional recipes passed down through generations. The chef, a warm and cheerful woman, greeted everyone with a smile and said, "Cooking is not about perfection. It's about love." Her words set the tone for the class. As we chopped vegetables and stirred pots, people shared stories about family meals, recipes from their childhood, and memories brought alive through smell and taste. A man next to me smiled as he stirred a pot of soup. "This smell takes me back to childhood," he said softly. I realized that food can carry not just taste, but emotion. It connects us to our past, to the people who raised us, and to moments we thought we had forgotten. Another day, while walking through a park, I noticed a little girl trying to fly a kite. She ran again and again, but the wind was too weak and the kite kept falling. She looked disappointed, so I offered to help. Together, we held the string, waited for the right moment, and ran across the open field. Finally, the kite lifted into the sky. Her face lit up with pure joy as she shouted, "I didn't think it would work." That simple moment reminded me that success often comes after many attempts, and sometimes all we need is a bit of patience and a little help from someone who believes in us. A few days later, I stopped by a public library to return a book. At one table, I noticed an elderly man surrounded by notebooks and dictionaries. He looked so focused that I gently asked what he was studying. He told me he was teaching himself English so he could speak with his grandchildren who lived in another country. His dedication touched me deeply. He smiled and said, "Learning never stops, no matter your age." His determination motivated me to continue learning new things, even when life feels busy or overwhelming. Another moment stayed with me from a visit to a local market. While buying vegetables, I noticed a young girl helping her father at a small fruit stand. She arranged apples carefully, placing them in neat rows as if each one mattered. When a customer complimented her work, she smiled proudly. Her father said she was learning responsibility. Watching them made me realize that children learn values through small routines, helping a parent, completing tasks, or taking pride in their work. Many of life's most important lessons, kindness, patience, responsibility, begin in moments just like those. One evening while walking home from the market, the sky slowly changed colors as the sun set. People hurried past me, talking on phones, rushing to catch buses, or carrying grocery bags. I slowed down and simply watched the sky. A soft orange glow filled the air, and birds flew across the horizon in gentle formation. It struck me how often we rush through our days without noticing quiet beauty. That sunset reminded me that peace is often right in front of us. We just need to pause long enough to see it. While jogging by the river one evening, I stopped to admire the sky. An older woman sat on a nearby bench, watching the horizon. She smiled and said, "Beautiful sunset, isn't it?" I sat beside her, and she told me that after losing her husband a few years earlier, the river had become her source of comfort. "The sunset reminds me that endings can still be beautiful," she said softly. Her words stayed with me, a reminder that even in sadness or change, light can be found if we allow ourselves to see it. A few weeks later, I joined a community cleanup at a nearby beach. Dozens of volunteers gathered to pick up trash along the shore. A young voice said excitedly, "I want to make the beach clean for the fish." His innocence made everyone smile. Caring for the world often begins with the pure intentions of children. One morning, while waiting for coffee at a small cafe, I overheard two students practicing English. They repeated phrases, corrected each other, and laughed at their mistakes. One said, "We sound funny, but we're improving." Their determination reminded me that mistakes are not failures, they are steps forward. I joined their conversation briefly, encouraging them to keep practicing. They thanked me warmly, and I left feeling inspired by their enthusiasm. A few days later, I visited an art exhibition downtown. One painting immediately caught my eye, a rainy city street at night with glowing reflections in every puddle. I asked the artist what inspired it. He smiled and said, "Rain reminds me of renewal. Even the dirtiest streets look clean after the rain." His perspective fascinated me. It reminded me that challenges, like rain, can wash away old worries and offer a fresh start if we face them with hope instead of fear. Not long after, I hiked in a forest outside the city. The air smelled of leaves and earth, and sunlight filtered through the treetops like soft ribbons. Halfway along the trail, I found a family eating lunch beneath a large tree. They immediately offered me a sandwich and said, "It's more fun to eat with company." Their kindness warmed my heart. We talked about nature, hiking, and simple joys. Experiences like that remind me how strangers can become companions, even if only for a moment. Sometimes all it takes is a shared meal or a friendly gesture to create a connection. Each of these moments, a sunset, a beach cleanup, a shared conversation, a quiet forest lunch, taught me something meaningful. They showed me that beauty exists in ordinary experiences, kindness can appear from anyone, and simple interactions often carry powerful lessons. Life is full of reminders to slow down, appreciate the world, and stay open to the people we meet along the way.